The billionaire thought he had buried his past. He had buried it beneath glass towers and iron contracts, beneath headlines that praised his brilliance and silence that protected his pride. He had buried it beneath a name that made rooms stand when he entered and voices lower when he spoke. But fate had other plans, because on a cold hospital morning, as machines hummed softly in a steady beep, beep, beep counted time he could no longer control, Caden Herman lay flat on his back, powerless for the first time in his life. Wires wrapped around his chest like accusations. Tubes whispered air into lungs that had forgotten how to breathe calmly. The smell of antiseptic clung to everything, sharp and unforgiving, a reminder that money could buy the best care, but not immunity. Caden Herman, the untouchable CEO, stared at the ceiling and realized something terrifying. His heart, the very thing he had ignored for years, was failing him. The door opened quietly. He didn't turn his head. He expected another nurse, another update, another clinical voice reminding him that even giants fall. Instead, the room changed. The air shifted. Footsteps stopped beside his bed. "Mr. Herman," a woman said calmly, professionally. "Can you hear me?" That voice. His eyes snapped open. Time didn't slow. It collapsed. Standing at the foot of his bed was the last woman he ever expected to see again. She wore a white coat now. Her hair was pulled back neatly. Her posture was steady, confident, composed, untouchable. There was no hesitation in her eyes, no bitterness, no softness meant for him, only control. "Berenice?" His voice cracked around her name. She met his gaze without flinching. "Hello, Caden." The woman he divorced for being childless was now the doctor responsible for his failing heart. And then he saw them. 2 children stood just behind her. A boy, tall for his age, quiet eyes sharp with curiosity. A girl, gentle-faced, her hand gripping the sleeve of Berenice's coat as if anchoring herself. They stared at him, not with fear, not with awe, but with something far more unsettling. Caden's chest tightened. "Who?" he whispered, his throat suddenly dry. "Who are they?" Berenice didn't rush her answer. She looked at the children first, then back at him. "My life," she said simply. And in that moment, as the machines continued their indifferent rhythm, Caden Herman realized something worse than the pain in his chest. The past hadn't come back to haunt him. It had come back to confront him. "Now let me ask you something. Have you ever walked away from someone, not because you stopped loving them, but because you were afraid of what they couldn't give you? Have you ever made a choice that made sense to the world, only to discover later that it destroyed the one thing that truly mattered? Because this story isn't just about a billionaire. It's about pressure, fear, regret, and what happens when love is treated like a transaction instead of a promise. Welcome back to Mr. Williams Storytime, and if this is your first time here, you're in the right place. This channel is home to stories that don't just entertain you for a moment. They stay with you long after the screen goes dark. If you believe stories still have the power to heal, to teach, and to humble us, go ahead and like this video and subscribe so you don't miss the ones that matter most. Because what happens next will change everything you think you know about love, legacy, and second chances. You see, Caden Herman wasn't always the man the world feared and admired. Before the billions, before the private jets and glass offices, before power reshaped his voice and success hardened his heart, he was just a man with a dream that no one believed in, and the only person who saw him. Back then, his heart had been full. Now, it was failing, and the children standing at her side, children who shared his eyes, his blood, his very DNA, were a truth he never expected to face, a truth that would force him to confront the one decision he thought he had justified, the woman he let go of, the family he never knew existed, and the price of choosing legacy over love. Stay with me, because this isn't a story about revenge. It isn't about punishment. It's about what happens when fear makes a choice for you, and life answers back in ways you never imagined. Let's go back to where it all began, before the world learned his name, before money sharpened his edges and power taught him restraint. Caden Herman lived in a 1-bedroom apartment that smelled faintly of burnt toast and ambition. The walls were thin. The heater worked only when it wanted to, and every night the glow of his laptop lit up the room like a small, stubborn promise. He was building something no one else believed in. Not his friends, not his former professors, not even the investors who politely smiled and never called back. But one evening, in a quiet coffee shop tucked between a closed bookstore and a laundromat that never seemed to sleep, someone did. Berenice Donnelly sat alone at a corner table, her medical textbook open, highlighter resting between her fingers. She'd been there for hours, nursing the same cup of coffee, memorizing the language of the human body, how it broke, how it healed, how it fought to live. She noticed him because he didn't look defeated. Tired, yes. Frustrated, absolutely. But defeated? No. He stared at his screen with a kind of intensity that refused surrender, as if daring the universe to prove him wrong. "You look like someone who refuses to quit," she said, closing her book and meeting his eyes. Caden blinked, surprised. Then he smiled, a faint, crooked smile that hadn't been used much lately. "That makes two of us," he replied. That was how it began. No dramatic music, no grand gestures, just two strangers recognizing something familiar in each other, the quiet determination to keep going when it would be easier to stop. They talked until the coffee shop lights dimmed and the barista stacked chairs nearby. He told her about his idea, an ambitious platform that promised to change how businesses communicated globally. She listened, not once checking her phone, asking questions that showed she truly understood. She told him about medical school, about the exhaustion, about the pressure to be perfect when lives depended on it. He listened with the same intensity he gave his dreams. When they stood to leave, neither of them wanted the night to end. From that moment on, life intertwined them gently, naturally. When Caden's ideas collapsed under rejection emails and polite silence, Berenice stayed. She brought him late-night meals when he forgot to eat. She reminded him to sleep when his body shook from exhaustion. When investors laughed behind closed doors, she reminded him that laughter didn't define worth. When doubt crept into his voice, she steadied it. She didn't love him for what he might become. She loved him for who he already was. Some nights, after long days that drained them both, she rested her head against his chest and listened to his heartbeat, a steady, hopeful rhythm that felt invincible then. "No matter how big you become," she whispered once, tracing slow circles over his heart, "promise you won't lose yourself." He kissed the top of her head and answered without hesitation, "I won't." He believed it. They married quietly, no luxury, no applause, no headlines, just love, a small ceremony, a handful of friends, a simple ring that meant more than anything money could buy. For a while, happiness came easily. They laughed often, dreamed freely, believed blindly, and then success arrived. Not gradually, not politely. It exploded. The call came early one morning, a major investor, a contract big enough to change everything, then another and another. Within months, Caden's idea became a company. The company became a phenomenon. Magazines wanted interviews, conferences wanted speeches, investors bowed instead of laughed. They moved out of the apartment and into a house so large it echoed when they spoke. The walls were pristine, the floors spotless, and slowly silence crept in. At first they joked about it. "We'll get used to it," Berenice said, trying to fill rooms with laughter. They waited for children next. They assumed it would happen naturally, because love always had. But weeks turned into months, months into years. Doctor visits replaced date nights. Test results replaced hope. Berenice smiled through it all. "I'm okay," she always said. But late at night, alone in the bathroom, she cried quietly so Caden wouldn't hear. How to swallow disappointment without letting it show. What she didn't see, what no one saw, was the pressure beginning to poison Caden's heart. Every meeting carried the same unspoken question. Every celebration came with whispers. A man like him needed an heir. A legacy needed blood. A kingdom needed succession. At first he ignored it. Then he heard it too often. And slowly, without realizing it, fear began rewriting his promises. The man who once swore never to lose himself was losing something far more dangerous. Perspective. He started measuring love by outcomes, marriage by productivity, happiness by what it produced. And Berenice, who had given him everything, felt him drifting. She didn't confront him. She trusted him, because love, she believed, meant patience, and patience, she believed, would save them. She was wrong. But not because love failed, because fear arrived first, and it was louder. The morning everything changed began like every other, quiet, rushed, and unremarkable. Caden sat at the small kitchen table of their apartment, laptop open, coffee growing cold beside him. Berenice moved behind him, already dressed for her hospital shift, tying her hair back while scanning notes on her phone. Neither of them knew that within the next hour the life they understood would end. The email arrived first, then the call, then another call before the first one ended. A major global investor had reviewed the platform again, this time not as a gamble but as a future cornerstone of digital infrastructure. Contracts were drafted before the day was over. By evening, the valuation had multiplied beyond anything Caden had dared to imagine. He stood in the living room, phone pressed to his ear, eyes unfocused, nodding silently as voices praised his vision. When he hung up, he didn't speak. He just stared at the wall. Berenice watched him carefully. She recognized shock when she saw it. She saw it on patients all the time. "Caden?" she said softly. He turned to her, eyes glassy. "They said yes," he whispered. For a moment neither of them moved. Then she laughed, a sound of pure, unfiltered joy, and threw her arms around him. He lifted her off the ground, spinning her once, twice, both of them laughing like children who didn't yet understand the cost of their miracle. They celebrated with takeout on the floor because they hadn't bought a dining table yet. They toasted with mismatched mugs. They dreamed out loud, naming possibilities, futures, cities they might live in someday. That night, they held each other longer than usual. And for the first time, success felt like love's reward. The world noticed quickly, too quickly. Within weeks, Caden's inbox overflowed with interview requests. Tech magazines called him a visionary. Business panels wanted his presence. Conferences flew him across the country to speak on innovation and leadership. His face appeared online, then in print, then on screens large enough to make him look like a stranger to himself. At first, Berenice went with him when she could. She stood at the back of crowded rooms, watching him command attention with a confidence she remembered nurturing in silence. She felt proud. But pride slowly mixed with something else. Distance. People stopped asking about them. They asked about him. They praised his brilliance, his ambition, his drive. They shook his hand and spoke of legacy, of empires, of the future. Berenice became his wife, introduced quickly, smiled at politely, moved past efficiently. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself love didn't need applause. But even love, she learned, needed time. The apartment disappeared almost overnight. Boxes replaced furniture. Movers filled the halls. Their familiar walls, marked by years of shared struggle, were stripped bare. The new house was enormous, too enormous. It had rooms they didn't know what to do with, ceilings that swallowed sound, windows that framed views they didn't yet feel worthy of. The first night they slept there, Berenice lay awake, listening. No city noise, no neighbors, no life, just silence. Caden was already answering emails beside her, the glow of his phone reflecting off the walls. "You don't have to do that right now," she whispered. "I just need to respond to a few things," he said without looking up. She turned toward him, watching the man she loved slowly vanish behind notifications and expectations. The house was beautiful and empty. The shift was subtle, so subtle that neither of them noticed it at first. Caden stopped asking about her day, not because he didn't care, but because his mind never stopped racing. Meetings blurred into one another, decisions piled up. Every moment felt urgent. Berenice stopped interrupting him, not because she had nothing to say, but because she didn't want to be another demand. They began existing around each other instead of with each other. Love didn't leave. It just waited quietly in corners. It showed up in small ways. Missed dinners, canceled weekends, phone calls taken during conversations. Caden promised he'd make time soon. Berenice believed him. She always had, but soon kept moving further away. One night she dressed carefully, wearing the blue dress he once said made her eyes look brighter. She set the table herself, lighting a single candle. He arrived late, very late. "I'm sorry," he said, loosening his tie. The meeting ran long, the food was cold. She smiled anyway. "It's okay," but something inside her cracked quietly. They talked about children, more seriously then. Maybe because silence needed filling, maybe because hope felt necessary. They imagined names, bedrooms, small hands reaching for theirs. Months passed. Nothing happened. They reassured each other at first. "It'll happen when it's meant to," Caden said. Berenice nodded, smiling, even as her chest tightened. She understood biology better than most, and biology didn't respond to optimism. Appointments replaced dinners, clinics replaced concerts, test results replaced laughter. Berenice sat in waiting rooms where other women avoided eye contact, all of them silently carrying the same fear. She went through procedures, with grace, with professionalism, with quiet endurance. When he couldn't, he apologized. "I'll come next time," he promised. There was always a next time. The word infertility entered their vocabulary like a trespasser. Doctors spoke carefully. Statistics were mentioned gently. Options were outlined clinically. Caden listened without speaking. At home, they avoided the topic. They watched television instead, answered emails, pretended exhaustion was the reason for silence. But grief doesn't disappear when ignored. It grows heavier. At night, Berenice locked herself in the bathroom. She cried into towels, into her hands, into silence. She studied her reflection, strong, capable, loving, and wondered why her body felt like a betrayal. She never blamed Caden. She blamed herself, and in doing so, she carried pain that wasn't meant to be carried alone. The pressure. Every dinner with investors circled back to the same topic. Legacy, heirs, family. He laughed it off publicly. Privately, it hollowed him out. He never told Berenice how heavy it felt. He never admitted how terrified he was of becoming everything people expected him to be. Instead, he buried himself in work, because work didn't ask for answers he didn't have. The missed moments piled up quietly. Anniversaries celebrated late. Birthdays remembered, but rushed. Conversations postponed indefinitely. They lay in bed beside each other at night, backs turned, hearts heavy with things left unsaid. Love still existed, but it was suffocating beneath fear. And this is where I want to pause and ask you something. Do you believe success strengthens love, or does it expose the cracks we refuse to face? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective might help someone else who's walking this same road. Because for Caden and Berenice, the distance wasn't caused by hatred. It was caused by pressure. And pressure, left unchecked, would soon demand a terrible price. Pressure rarely arrives shouting. It whispers first. At boardrooms polished with glass and steel, Caden Herman was praised for his vision, but praised with conditions. "Your growth trajectory is incredible," one investor said, fingers steepled. "Long-term stability will be important moving forward." Stability. The word appeared everywhere. In meetings, in contracts, in conversations that smiled politely but carried weight beneath them. Peers joked about it openly. You building an empire or just enjoying the throne? Someone laughed over drinks. Caden smiled back, but every joke landed somewhere deep in his chest. They spoke of continuity, of succession, of futures that extended beyond quarterly earnings. No one said the word child outright. They didn't need to. Family gatherings grew uncomfortable. Questions were disguised as concern. "You two must be so busy," an aunt said, watching Berenice closely. "But surely you're thinking about the next chapter." His parents were gentler, but no less persistent. "You've built something incredible, son," his father said one evening. "It would be nice to see it carried forward." Berenice sat beside him, hands folded neatly in her lap. She smiled. She always smiled. But inside, the words scraped against wounds that hadn't healed. The media was less careful. Articles praised Caden's meteoric rise and subtly questioned what came next. Who will inherit the Herman legacy? Will the billionaire CEO build more than a company? Success begs for succession. Berenice read those headlines alone. She never shared them with Caden. She didn't want to burden him. What she didn't realize was that the burden had already begun crushing him. Caden didn't talk about it. He absorbed it. He replayed conversations late at night. He reread articles he pretended not to care about. He imagined futures where everything he built dissolved the moment he was gone. He began to fear not poverty, but insignificance. And fear is persuasive. It reshapes logic. It reframes priorities. It turns love into something measurable. Without realizing it, Caden began to see marriage differently. Not as partnership, but as infrastructure. Something meant to support legacy, to produce continuity. He hated himself for thinking that way, but the thought returned anyway. What if love wasn't enough? What if devotion didn't guarantee permanence? What if everything he built ended with him? He never voiced these questions, but they sat between him and Berenice like an unspoken third presence. The night it finally surfaced, rain tapped softly against the windows. Dinner sat untouched between them. Berenice had cooked his favorite meal. He barely noticed. She watched him carefully, reading his silence the way she'd learned to read heart monitors, subtle changes, dangerous pauses. "Something's wrong," she said quietly. Caden exhaled slowly. "We need to talk." Her hands tightened around her fork. About work, about time, about them? She didn't know which answer scared her more. Without a word she stood, walked to the counter, and returned with a folder. She placed it between them. Medical reports, test results, summaries she'd memorized already. "I tried everything," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. "Every treatment, every option." Caden stared at the papers. They looked official. Final. He didn't touch them. "I know this isn't what we hoped for," she continued softly, "but I want you to know, I never stopped believing in us." Her eyes glistened. "For better or worse," she whispered. "That wasn't just a promise to me. It was my life." She reached for his hand. He didn't pull away, but he didn't squeeze back either. "And if this never changes?" he asked quietly. The words fell like glass. Her breath caught. If I can never give you a child, what then?" The silence stretched. She searched his face for reassurance, for love, for them. "Then we'd choose each other," she said, her voice breaking. "The way we always have." She waited. Caden said nothing, not because he didn't love her, but because fear had stolen his voice. His silence answered for him, and in that silence something sacred fractured. Berenice withdrew her hand slowly, as if touching him suddenly hurt. In that moment, she understood. Love was no longer enough for him, and marriage, once sacred, had become a negotiation, a bargain, a calculation. She nodded faintly, swallowing tears she refused to let fall. "Okay," she said softly, but nothing was okay. Divorce is often imagined as loud, broken plates and raised voices, but for Caden Herman and Berenice Donnelly, it arrived quietly, like something already decided long before it was spoken aloud. They didn't argue after that night. That was the strangest part. They moved through the days with careful politeness, as if stepping around shattered glass neither of them wanted to acknowledge. Conversations became logistical. Schedules were discussed. Work took precedence, not because it mattered more, but because it required less emotional courage. Caden stayed out later. Berenice woke earlier. They existed in the same space but no longer shared it. The house, once merely silent, now felt heavy, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something irreversible to happen. And eventually, it did. One evening, as dusk painted the windows in soft gray, Caden spoke the words neither of them had dared to say. "I think we should take some time apart." Berenice didn't react immediately. She nodded once, slowly, as if her heart had already heard the sentence and was simply waiting for her mind to catch up. They sat across from each other at the same table where hope had once been placed so gently between them. "I don't want this to hurt you," Caden said, his voice low. "That's the last thing I want." Berenice folded her hands together to keep them from trembling. "Then why does it feel like that's exactly what's happening?" she asked quietly. He looked down. "Because the truth was unbearable when spoken plainly. I don't know how to live with this pressure," he admitted. "I don't know how to make peace with the idea that everything ends with me." She leaned forward slightly. "What we built doesn't end with you," she said. "It lives in the people we've touched, in the lives you've changed." He shook his head. "That's not how the world sees it. And since when do you let the world decide what matters?" she asked. That question haunted him, but it didn't stop him. "I still love you," he said suddenly, the words breaking free before he could stop them. Berenice's breath hitched. "Then why are you leaving?" she asked. Silence, long, heavy, unforgiving. "Because love isn't enough anymore," he said at last. The sentence hung between them, cold and final. She closed her eyes. In that moment she understood something devastating. He wasn't leaving because she was incapable. He was leaving because he was afraid. And fear had chosen for him. Berenice did not cry, not then. She sat there, back straight, expression composed, as if absorbing the pain carefully, so it wouldn't spill everywhere. "If that's how you feel," she said softly, "then I won't fight you." Her calm unsettled him. He'd expected anger, pleas, accusations. But she offered him dignity instead, and that made it worse. The process was efficient. Lawyers were polite. Documents were prepared. Assets were divided with precision. They signed the papers in silence. Caden's hand hesitated before writing his name. Berenice's didn't. When the pen lifted from the page, something final settled into the room. A marriage ended without a scene, without drama, without closure. Packing was harder. Every room held a memory. The couch where they once laughed until midnight. The kitchen where they burned meals together. The bedroom where they planned futures that would never come. Berenice folded clothes slowly, deliberately. She paused often, not to cry but to remember. Caden watched her from the doorway, heart tightening with every box she filled. He wanted to stop her. He wanted to say something. But pride stood between them like a wall he didn't know how to climb. When the day came for her to leave, she asked for nothing. No money, no house, no compensation. "I just want my things," she said simply. He stared at her. "You don't want anything else?" She met his eyes. "I don't want what doesn't want me." Those words followed him long after she walked out the door. The house felt enormous once she was gone. Too quiet. Caden wandered from room to room, haunted by echoes of a life he had dismantled with his own hands. He sat on the edge of the bed they once shared and buried his face in his hands. What have I done? The question came too late. He considered calling her. More than once. But every time he reached for his phone, pride intervened. What would he say? He convinced himself it was better this way. That pain now was better than regret later. He was wrong. And by the time he realized it, Berenice Donnelly was already walking into a future he would no longer be part of. Sometimes life waits until you stop asking, until you stop hoping, until you stop believing. Only then does it answer. Berenice Donnelly left without ceremony. No farewell dinner, no long goodbyes. Just 2 suitcases, her medical credentials, and a heart she didn't recognize anymore. She chose a city far enough away that memories wouldn't ambush her at every corner, but close enough that she didn't feel like she was running. A place where no one knew her as Caden Herman's wife. A place where she could exist simply as herself. Her new apartment was small, functional, quiet, perfect for rebuilding. The first night she slept there, the silence felt different, not oppressive like the mansion had been, but open, honest, unforgiving in a way that forced her to sit with her grief instead of hiding from it. She unpacked slowly. Each item felt like a fragment of a life she had lived fully and lost completely. Loneliness arrived in waves. Some days it was gentle, almost peaceful. Other days it crushed her without warning. She went to work. She focused on patience, on heartbeats and rhythms and lives that depended on her clarity. Medicine gave her structure when emotions threatened to dissolve it. At night, she walked the city streets alone, learning new routes, new sounds, new ways of breathing. She let herself cry, not quietly anymore, fully. Healing, she discovered, wasn't graceful. It was messy, exhausting, necessary. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the pain softened. It happened on an ordinary morning. No music, no intuition, no signs. Just a test taken out of routine, more habit than hope. She stared at it absently while brushing her teeth. Then she froze. One line, then another. Her heart skipped. She looked again, closer, as if proximity could change the truth, positive. Her knees buckled. She sat on the bathroom floor, back against the wall, staring at something she had stopped believing possible. "No," she whispered. "This isn't." She checked the date, the timing. Her breath caught. Shock gave way to laughter, then tears, then disbelief all over again. She pressed a hand to her mouth, afraid to breathe too loudly, as if the moment might vanish. After everything, after the loss, after the divorce, after the silence. Life had answered, not when she begged, but when she had finally let go. The doctor confirmed it days later. "You're pregnant," she said gently. Berenice nodded, bracing herself. The word echoed. Twins. Berenice laughed, then cried, then laughed again, her hands trembling as she covered her face. 2 lives, 2 miracles, arriving after she had been told she would never have one. That night, reality settled in, and with it, a name she hadn't allowed herself to say out loud in weeks. She held her phone for a long time. Her thumb hovered over his contact. Didn't he? The children were his, but so was the choice he had made. She imagined his reaction, the shock, the regret, the confusion, and she felt something unexpected. Fear. Not out of bitterness, not out of revenge, but because he had already chosen a life without her, and she refused to let motherhood become a bargaining chip for love that had walked away. These children would never wonder if they were enough. She would make sure of that. Pregnancy was harder than she expected, physically exhausting, emotionally overwhelming. She attended appointments, alone, felt the first kicks alone, listened to heartbeats echo through sterile rooms with no one to squeeze her hand, but she wasn't lonely. She talked to them constantly, in the quiet apartment, on evening walks, before falling asleep. She told them stories about courage, about resilience, about love that doesn't abandon. She built a world for them before they ever arrived in it. Labor was long, painful, relentless. But when the first cry pierced the room, nothing else mattered. "A boy," the nurse said warmly. Berenice reached out with trembling hands as they placed him against her chest. His tiny fingers curled instinctively, gripping her skin as if he already knew where he belonged. She sobbed, not from pain, but from gratitude. Minutes later, another cry followed, softer, gentler, a girl, Caitlin, placed beside her brother, just as close, just as real. Two hearts, two lives she would protect with everything she had. Motherhood didn't weaken her, it forged her. Sleep deprivation sharpened her focus. Love expanded her capacity. Fear taught her courage she never knew she possessed. She finished her training with children on her hips and determination in her stride. She became stronger, not despite them, but because of them. Dylan grew observant and thoughtful. Caitlin grew warm and empathetic. They became her heartbeat, her reason, her miracle. And though the world would one day collide their pasts and futures in ways she could never predict, for now, she was whole. Pain does not always destroy. Sometimes it reshapes. Berenice Donnelly learned quickly that time no longer belonged to her. It belonged to small hands that tugged at her sleeves, to midnight cries and early morning laughter, to bottles warmed in half-dark kitchens and textbooks read in fragments between breaths. Her days began before sunrise. She would rise quietly, careful not to wake Dylan and Caitlin, and stand for a moment in the doorway of their room, watching them sleep as if committing the sight to memory. Two tiny chests rising and falling, two miracles breathing steadily. Then she moved. Scrubs, coffee, notes. She memorized lectures while packing lunches, reviewed cardiac physiology while rocking one child with her foot and steadying the other with her arm. Her life became a choreography of necessity and devotion. There was no room for self-pity, only forward. Medical training had never been kind. As a single mother, it was merciless. There were nights when exhaustion blurred her vision, when the words on the page refused to make sense. Days when she arrived at rotations with barely 3 hours of sleep and a smile she practiced in the mirror. Some colleagues offered sympathy, others offered judgment. She didn't answer honestly, because the truth was simple and brutal. She didn't manage, she endured. She missed social events, declined invitations, studied while others rested, learned to function on willpower and love alone. And when doubt crept in, when she questioned whether she was asking too much of herself, she remembered why she was here. Her children deserved a mother who did not give up. Something changed as the years passed, not suddenly, not dramatically, but steadily. The same pain that once broke her now sharpened her instincts. She spoke with clarity, moved with purpose. Her hands no longer trembled during procedures. Her voice carried authority in rooms where it once hesitated. Attendings noticed. Patients trusted her. She listened differently because she understood loss, fear, and hope in ways textbooks could never teach. She didn't just treat symptoms. She treated people. Cardiology called to her for reasons she never spoke aloud. The heart, fragile, resilient, stubborn, felt familiar. She studied relentlessly, specialized carefully, learned to read rhythms the way some read poetry. When she completed her training, there was no celebration dinner, just a quiet night at home with Dylan and Caitlin asleep on either side of her, her certification resting on the table like a promise kept. She cried then, not from relief, but from pride. Recognition came slowly, then all at once. Her research was published, her diagnostic accuracy praised, her calm under pressure admired. She became the doctor colleagues sought during complex cases. Dr. Donnelly will know, they said. And she always did, not because she was flawless, but because she never stopped learning, never stopped caring. Dylan grew into a quiet strength. He watched more than he spoke, noticed things others missed, asked questions that startled her with their depth. "Why do hearts beat faster when people are scared?" he once asked. "Because they're trying to protect us," she replied. He nodded, thoughtful. He carried responsibility naturally, often checking on his sister before himself, a protector in the making. Caitlin was different, soft-spoken, empathetic. Her presence soothed rooms. She hugged freely, loved deeply, felt everything. If Dylan was her anchor, Caitlin was her light. Together, they balanced each other perfectly. Life wasn't grand. It was beautiful in small ways. Pancakes shaped like hearts. Homework spread across the kitchen table. Laughter during evening walks. They built traditions quietly. Berenice watched them grow with awe. The questions came gently. "Do we have a dad?" Dylan asked one evening. Berenice paused, not because she hadn't prepared for the moment, but because she respected it. "Yes," she said softly. "Where is he?" Caitlin asked. Berenice knelt beside them. "He's someone who mattered very much to me once," she said carefully, "and someone who gave me the greatest gifts of my life. Why isn't he here?" Dylan asked. She met his eyes. "Does he know about us?" Caitlin whispered. Berenice smiled gently. "No," she said. "But that doesn't mean he wouldn't care. It just means life hasn't crossed our paths yet." They accepted her answer. Because children understand truth when it's wrapped in love. And Berenice knew, deep in her heart, that someday the past would return. Not as a wound, but as a reckoning. And when it did, she would be ready. Power has a way of disguising weakness. For years, it worked perfectly. Caden Herman stood at the top of everything he had once prayed for. His company had grown beyond projections, beyond competitors, beyond the limits anyone had dared to imagine in those early coffee-to-shop days. Headquarters spanned multiple cities. His name opened doors that once wouldn't return emails. He owned penthouses he rarely slept in, cars he barely drove, watches worth more than his first apartment. People listened when he spoke. They waited when he paused. From the outside, his life looked untouchable. A self-made billionaire, a visionary, a man who turned pressure into power. But success had rewritten his days into something mechanical. Meetings began before sunrise and ended long after nightfall. Flights blurred together. Hotel rooms felt interchangeable. Assistants managed every detail of his schedule, except the ones that mattered. No one asked if he was happy. They assumed the answer. The emptiness came quietly. He noticed it late at night, sitting alone in rooms designed for celebration but echoing with silence. He noticed it when achievements felt hollow, when applause faded too quickly, when victories tasted like obligation instead of joy. He filled the space with work, with motion, with noise, but emptiness is patient. It waits. Sometimes in rare moments of stillness, his mind wandered backward, to a smaller apartment, a softer voice, a promise he had broken without realizing its cost. He shut those thoughts down immediately. Regret was inefficient. His body warned him long before it betrayed him. Headaches that lingered longer than they should. Chest tightness he blamed, on stress. Shortness of breath dismissed as exhaustion. Doctors recommended rest. He postponed. Assistants suggested breaks. He declined. There was always another deal, another expansion, another expectation to meet. His heart adjusted the only way it knew how, by working harder, until it couldn't. Caden trusted no one completely. Success had taught him caution. Power had taught him solitude. Friends became acquaintances. Relationships remained superficial. Intimacy felt like a distraction he couldn't afford. The world respected him, but no one knew him. And in the quiet moments, when sleep refused to come, he felt the weight of that truth pressing against his chest, heavier than any contract. The collapse happened during a board presentation. Ironically, it was about expansion. Caden stood confidently, outlining future growth, his voice steady, his posture controlled. Words flowed effortlessly, until they didn't. A sharp pain shot through his chest. He paused, adjusted his stance, continued speaking. The world tilted violently. And then, darkness. Shouts filled the room. Someone caught him before he hit the ground. "Call an ambulance." Hands pressed against his chest. Jackets were folded beneath his head. Faces hovered above him, pale with fear. Caden heard none of it. His body had shut him out. As consciousness slipped away, one thought surfaced uninvited. I should have listened. Not to doctors, to his heart. Sirens cut through the city like a warning. Lights flashed, doors burst open. Orders were shouted with precision and urgency. Caden was rushed through corridors he would later remember only in fragments, white ceilings, sharp smells, hurried voices speaking in terms he suddenly couldn't afford to ignore. Monitors beeped. 4S were inserted. His suit, custom-tailored, immaculate, was cut away without hesitation. For the first time in decades, his wealth meant nothing. He was just a man, and his heart was failing. When he woke, fear was the first thing he felt, not the abstract kind he'd mastered in business. Real fear, primal, fear of ending, fear of unfinished things, fear of the life he had built, collapsing without anyone to inherit it, or remember it, or love him through it. As machines hummed around him and reality pressed in, Caden Herman understood something he had avoided for years. Power does not protect you from consequence, and the heart, ignored long enough, will demand to be heard. The first thing Caden Herman felt was weight, not physical pain, not yet, but the heavy, unmistakable sensation of being tethered to something beyond his control. His chest rose and fell unevenly. Air entered his lungs with assistance, not permission. The second thing he heard was sound, a rhythmic beep, 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 steady, clinical, indifferent. And then came awareness. His eyelids fluttered open, white ceiling, blurred lights, a faint reflection of his own face on a polished metal rail. Hospital. The word formed slowly, dragging memory with it. The boardroom, the pain, the fall. He tried to move. A sharp protest surged through his chest, forcing a groan from his throat. Easy, a voice said nearby. A nurse leaned into his line of sight, her expression calm but focused. You've been through a serious cardiac event, Mr. Herman. Try not to move. The word landed hard. His mind raced, but his body lagged behind. How long? He started, then coughed. You've been unconscious for several hours, she said. You're stable now. Stable. That word again. It sounded less comforting when applied to his heart. He swallowed, staring at the unfamiliar vulnerability of his own hands. 4 lines taped to his skin, wires trailing off to machines that hummed quietly around him. For the first time in decades, Caden Herman felt small. I'm going to let your cardiologist know you're awake, the nurse continued. She's been overseeing your case. Cardiologist. Of course. He nodded faintly. The nurse stepped out, leaving him alone with the machines and his thoughts. Moments later, the door opened again. Footsteps entered the room, measured, confident. Mr. Herman, a woman's voice said. Can you hear me? His chest tightened before he even saw her, because something in that voice stirred memory. He turned his head slowly, and the world tilted. She stood at the foot of his bed, clipboard in hand, white coat pressed neatly over navy scrubs. Her hair was pulled back, her posture straight, her expression composed. Professional, controlled, unmistakably real. Berenice, he whispered. Her name slipped out of him like a reflex, raw, unguarded, unprepared. For a brief fraction of a second, something flickered in her eyes. Then it was gone. Yes, she said evenly. I'm Dr. Donnelly. I'll be overseeing your care. Doctor, the word hit harder than the diagnosis. He stared at her, disbelief flooding his senses. This couldn't be happening. Of all the hospitals, of all the doctors, of all the possible futures. This one stood before him now. She stepped closer, checking the monitors, her movements precise and efficient. Her voice remained calm, measured, detached, exactly as it should be. You experienced acute heart failure triggered by prolonged stress and untreated warning signs, she explained. We've stabilized you for now, but your condition is serious. She didn't look at him when she said it. She didn't need to. Caden barely heard the words. His focus was locked on her hands, hands he once held, hands that once trembled against his chest as she whispered promises in the dark. Now they moved with surgical certainty. Berenice, he said again, louder this time. I didn't know. She raised a hand gently. Right now, this conversation needs to be about your health, she said. Personal matters can wait. Her boundary was clear, uncrossable, and it terrified him. How long have you been here? He asked carefully. At this hospital, she replied. Several years. You're a cardiologist now. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. You always were brilliant, he said softly. She paused, just long enough for the machines to mark the silence. Then she continued adjusting his fourth. Please rest, she said. We'll talk more later. She turned slightly toward the door, and that's when he saw them. 2 children stood quietly just behind her, They hadn't spoken, hadn't moved. A boy, maybe 10, tall for his age, eyes sharp and observant, studying Caden with careful intensity. A girl, slightly younger, soft features, gentle posture, her fingers wrapped around the edge of Berenice's coat. They weren't afraid. They were curious. Caden's heart stuttered. "Who?" he began. Berenice followed his gaze. For a moment her composure shifted, not broken but recalibrated. "They're with me," she said. "With you?" he echoed. "Yes." Something about the boy's eyes struck him, too familiar to ignore. The way he tilted his head, the way his gaze assessed instead of stared. And the girl, something warm and unsettling in her presence, like a memory he couldn't place. His breath came shallow. "They're your—" he asked, afraid to finish the question. "My children," Berenice said simply. The words echoed in the room. "Children." His chest tightened painfully, not from the monitors but from something deeper. Berenice hesitated. "Old enough," she said. The answer told him nothing, and everything. The boy took a small step forward. "Mom?" he asked quietly. Berenice turned toward him immediately, her expression softening in a way Caden had never seen before. "Yes, Dylan." The name lodged itself in Caden's chest. "And Caitlin," Berenice added gently, glancing at the girl. Caitlin smiled faintly. Caden swallowed hard. Over the next few days, treatment continued. Medications were adjusted, tests were ordered, procedures explained. Berenice remained professional throughout, never cold, but never familiar. She spoke to him the way she would any patient, clearly, honestly, without emotional indulgence. But the room was never empty of tension. Sometimes the children sat quietly in the corner, doing homework or reading. Sometimes they weren't there at all. Every time they were, Caden felt it, the pull, the ache, the unspoken question pounding against his ribs. He watched Dylan observe everything, how machines worked, how nurses spoke, how Berenice moved with authority. He watched Caitlin offer smiles to staff, small kindnesses that softened hard shifts. They were remarkable, and they felt familiar. One afternoon, as Berenice explained test results, Dylan interrupted gently. "Is his heart going to be okay?" he asked. Caden froze. The boy's voice, steady, thoughtful, sounded disturbingly like his own had at that age. "We're doing everything we can," she said. "And he's strong." "Good," he said. "Strong hearts are important." Caden's throat tightened. Caitlin stepped closer to the bed then, studying him with open curiosity. Berenice inhaled sharply. "I'm okay," Caden replied, voice thick. "Just tired. My mom fixes hearts," Caitlin said proudly. "She'll help you." Caden looked at Berenice. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, closing in. And this is where I want to pause for just a moment, because if this reunion is stirring something in you, if it's reminding you of a choice you made or a conversation you avoided, please consider sharing this story with someone who believes love deserves patience, honesty, and courage. You never know who might need to hear it, because for Caden Herman, the past wasn't just standing at his bedside. It was looking back at him, through the eyes of two children who might change everything. And the truth? The truth was about to demand its place. Truth does not rush. It waits until there is nowhere left to hide. The tests began quietly. Routine, they called them. Blood panels, imaging scans, genetic screenings ordered to better understand Caden Herman's cardiac condition and assess long-term treatment options. The language was clinical, neutral, designed to inform, not to disturb. But Caden felt unease settle deep in his chest long before the results returned. He had lived most of his life mastering outcomes, anticipating market shifts, predicting risks, controlling narratives. Yet lying in that hospital bed, tethered to machines and mercy, he realized something unsettling. He had no control here. Berenice reviewed charts with calm precision, explaining results in measured tones. She never lingered longer than necessary, never spoke more than required. Every word was professional, and every word reminded him of what she had become: strong, composed, unreachable. "Your heart function is compromised," she said one afternoon, pointing to a scan. "We're monitoring closely. Surgery is a possibility if medication doesn't stabilize you." He nodded slowly. "And the other tests?" he asked. She hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Some results are still pending," she replied, but something in her voice shifted. The confirmation arrived 3 days later. Berenice stood outside the consultation room holding a file she had already read twice. Inside, Caden sat upright, hands folded, eyes searching her face for answers she hadn't yet spoken. She closed the door behind her. "There's something we need to discuss," she said. Her tone was steady. Her hands were not. She placed the file on the table between them. "These tests were conducted to understand potential hereditary risk factors related to your condition," she continued. "As part of that process, genetic markers were compared." Caden frowned slightly. "Compared to what?" Berenice inhaled slowly. "To Dylan and Caitlin." The room went silent. "What?" he whispered. She met his gaze directly. "The results confirm it," she said. "They're your children." The words didn't land all at once. They shattered. Time fractured. Every sound faded except the pounding in his ears. His children. The phrase echoed, colliding with memories he hadn't allowed himself to revisit. The resemblance he had tried to rationalize away, it all aligned with devastating clarity. "They're mine," he said hoarsely. "Yes," Berenice replied. He leaned back slowly, as if the truth had physical weight. All those years, all that distance, all that certainty. The woman he divorced for being childless had carried his children, alone. Caden Herman broke, not quietly, not gracefully. His breath hitched, his hands trembled. A sound escaped him that wasn't quite a sob, but wasn't far from it. "I didn't know," he said repeatedly, shaking his head. "I swear, I didn't know." Tears blurred his vision. For the first time in his life, he didn't try to stop them. "I walked away," he whispered. "I chose legacy over love, and I didn't even realize I already had both." His shoulders shook as the full weight of his choice crushed down on him. The empire, the success, the validation, none of it mattered now, because the one thing he had believed he lacked, the very reason he destroyed his marriage, had existed all along. "I was wrong," he said, voice breaking. "I was so afraid of losing everything I built. I didn't realize I was destroying the only thing that mattered." He looked at her then, not as a doctor, not as an ex-wife, but as the woman he had once promised forever. "I'm sorry," he said, "for leaving, for doubting you, for making love conditional." His voice cracked completely. "I punished you for something that was never your fault." Berenice listened. She didn't interrupt, didn't accuse. When he finished, she nodded once. "I know," she said softly. Her calm was not indifference. It was survival. "I didn't tell you because you had already made your choice," she continued, "and I refused to let my children grow up feeling like they were the reason someone stayed." Her voice wavered, but only slightly. They deserved to be wanted, not negotiated for. Caden closed his eyes. "I was terrified," he admitted. "Terrified of becoming irrelevant, of leaving nothing behind." "You left something behind," she said gently. "You just didn't know it yet." He looked at her, eyes red, voice small. "Do they hate me?" Berenice shook her head. "They don't know you," she said, "and that's the hardest part." Silence stretched between them. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "I don't even know if I deserve a place in their lives. That's not something you get to decide alone," she replied. "Trust is built, slowly, carefully." He nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes." She studied him for a long moment. When she left the room, Caden remained seated, staring at the file on the table. The cost of his choice settled into him with brutal clarity, not reputational, but human. Redemption would not be granted. It would have to be earned. Redemption does not arrive with tears. It arrives with time, and time is unforgiving. Caden Herman did not ask immediately. That surprised him most. In the past, he had always spoken quickly, decisively, trained to secure outcomes before hesitation could weaken his position. But now, lying in recovery with the heart that reminded him daily of his own mortality, words felt heavier. He watched first. He listened. He learned. He watched the way Berenice spoke to Dylan and Caitlin, never raising her voice, never rushing them, always kneeling to meet their eyes. He noticed how naturally the children gravitated toward her presence, how safety lived in her tone. Only after days passed did he speak. "I don't expect anything," he said quietly one afternoon as she reviewed his chart. "But I want to do better than who I was." She didn't look at him right away. "Better how?" she asked. "I want a chance," he said. "Not to undo the past, but to be accountable for it." The word accountable surprised them both. Berenice set the chart down carefully. "If you're asking to be part of their lives," she said, "then understand this first. This is not about you." "I know," he said quickly. She raised her hand. "No," she corrected gently. "You think you know. But this is about consistency, patience, showing up even when it's uncomfortable." She looked at him fully now. "You don't get to disappear again. Not emotionally, not physically. Not when things don't go the way you hope." "I won't," he said. "You don't get to promise," she replied. "You get to prove." He nodded. "I accept that." And for the first time, she believed he might mean it. Recovery was slow. So was trust. Caden remained nearby after discharge, not because he demanded access, but because he wanted proximity. He attended therapy, followed medical advice, restructured his work schedule despite resistance from his board. For the first time, he chose presence over productivity. He showed up when Berenice allowed it, to school events where he sat quietly in the back, to hospital cafeterias where he listened more than he spoke, to evenings where silence said more than conversation ever could. Weeks passed, then months, never assumed, and slowly something changed. Trust did not bloom. It inched forward. Berenice watched him closely, not looking for perfection but patterns. Did he stay when it was inconvenient? Did he listen without defending himself? Did he respect her decisions, even when they disappointed him? He did, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes imperfectly, but consistently. And consistency was something fear had never taught him. The children remained cautious. Dylan observed him with the same careful curiosity he applied to everything. Caitlin was warmer, but reserved. Caden never introduced himself as their father. He waited. He answered questions honestly, but simply. He attended without intruding. One afternoon, Dylan asked, "Why do you come here?" Caden considered the question carefully. "Because I care," he said, "and because caring means showing up." Dylan nodded slowly. That was the beginning. There were setbacks, moments when old habits resurfaced, when meetings tempted him away, when impatience whispered that progress was too slow, and moments when hope flickered, a shared laugh, a homework question asked in his direction, a drawing left on a table, not addressed to him but not hidden either. Berenice watched these moments carefully. She allowed herself cautious optimism, not for romance, for responsibility. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, Caden spoke quietly. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," he said. "I don't expect it." She nodded. "I'm not offering absolution," she replied. "I'm offering opportunity." He met her gaze. "And if I fail, then you own it," she said, "and you keep going, without blaming anyone else." He understood. Redemption wasn't something to be earned once. It was something to be lived, daily. And for the first time in his life, Caden Herman embraced a truth no boardroom had ever taught him. Love is not negotiated. It is demonstrated. Hope does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it sits beside you in silence, waiting to see if you finally learned how to listen. The house was quiet in a way that felt earned, not empty, not tense, just still. Dylan and Caitlin were asleep upstairs, their doors cracked open the way Berenice always left them, enough to let light in, enough to let worry out. The soft hum of the dishwasher filled the kitchen, a steady rhythm that reminded Caden of heart monitors and second chances. They sat across from each other at the small kitchen table. No paperwork, no charts, no children listening from around corners. Just the two of them, at last. "I didn't plan this," Caden said quietly, breaking the silence. "Any of it. I didn't come here thinking, hoping." Berenice nodded, her hands wrapped around a mug that had long since gone cold. "I know," she said. "I needed time," he continued. "Not to decide what I wanted, but to understand what I had already lost." She met his eyes then, not guarded, not accusatory, present. "This is the first honest thing you've said to me in years," she replied. He absorbed that, didn't argue, didn't defend. "I was wrong," Caden said, "in ways I didn't understand until it was too late." He leaned back slightly, as if giving the words room to breathe. "I thought love had to produce something tangible to be real, a legacy, a name that outlived me, proof." His jaw tightened, and when fear crept in, I let it decide for me. "I didn't talk to you. I didn't trust you. I didn't trust us." Berenice listened without interruption. "You asked me a question once," he went on. "You asked if we would choose each other if nothing changed." Her breath stilled. I didn't answer, he said, because I was already choosing something else. He swallowed hard. I've lived with that silence ever since. Berenice took a long breath. I won't pretend it didn't break me, she said calmly. It did, in ways I didn't know I could survive. She looked down at her hands. But it also forced me to become someone I might never have discovered otherwise. She looked back up. I'm not the woman you left, she said, and I can't go back to being her. I wouldn't ask you to, Caden replied immediately. I need you to understand something, she continued. Love doesn't erase scars, it doesn't rewind time, and it doesn't guarantee safety. I know, he said. She tilted her head slightly. No, she corrected gently. You're learning. A faint, sad smile touched her lips. And that matters. Silence settled again, but this time it felt different. Honest. I'm not asking for another chance, Caden said after a moment. Not the way people usually mean it. She waited. I'm asking to keep doing what I'm doing, he said. Showing up, learning, being present. Whether it leads anywhere or not. Berenice studied him carefully. You're finally speaking without expectation, she observed. I don't want to bargain for love, he said. I already did that once, and it cost me everything. This is the first time I've felt safe hearing you speak, she admitted. His chest tightened, not with pain, but with something fragile and unfamiliar. They didn't touch. Not yet, but something shifted between them, more real. It was no longer about possession, no longer about outcome. It was about presence, about shared responsibility, about truth spoken gently, about staying, even when staying was uncomfortable. Love used to feel like something I had to protect, Berenice said thoughtfully. Now it feels like something I have to respect. Caden nodded. I used to think love was proven by what it produced, he replied. Now I know it's proven by what it endures. Their eyes met. No promises were made, none were needed. An understanding they both knew was stronger than hope alone. Caden paused near the doorway. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? She asked. For letting me learn, he replied. Even when I didn't deserve the lesson, she considered that. Redemption isn't about deserving, she said. It's about choosing to grow. Upstairs, a door creaked softly. Footsteps padded toward the top of the stairs. Mom, Caitlin's voice called sleepily. Berenice turned immediately. Yes, sweetheart. Can you stay for a minute? Caitlin asked. I had a bad dream. I'm coming, she said, already moving. Caden watched her go. She paused halfway up the stairs and looked back at him, not with longing, not with certainty, but with something far more meaningful, trust, being rebuilt one quiet moment at a time. And as Caden stood alone in the soft glow of the kitchen light, he understood something profound. Love hadn't returned to him. It had waited until he was finally worthy of meeting it where it stood. Some endings don't arrive with certainty. They arrive with understanding, and sometimes that is more than enough. Caden Herman did not leave that house with answers. He left with something far rarer, perspective. For the first time in his life, success no longer defined him. Power no longer protected him, and fear, once the voice that dictated his choices, had finally been exposed for what it was, a poor substitute for love. He walked into the night aware that not everything broken is meant to be repaired the same way it was built. Some things don't return to their original shape. They evolve. He learned that love cannot survive under conditions, that when commitment becomes a contract, the heart is always collateral damage. He learned that pressure, no matter how logical it sounds, can quietly poison what patience would have saved. And most painfully, he learned that blessings don't always arrive on our timeline. Sometimes they arrive after loss, after pride, after consequences. Berenice learned something too, that choosing peace is not the same as choosing weakness. She did not rebuild her life to prove anything. She rebuilt it because survival demanded growth. And Dylan and Caitlin, they remained what they had always been. Caden continued to show up, not loudly, not dramatically, but consistently. There were no grand gestures, no declarations meant to erase the past, only steady presence, quiet effort, accountability lived out in small, unremarkable moments. He attended school events without insisting on recognition, listened more than he spoke, learned names, learned routines, learned patience. Sometimes Dylan asked him questions. Sometimes Caitlin smiled at him when she thought no one was watching. And sometimes Berenice allowed herself to believe that growth, real growth, was happening. Not because she hoped for reunion, but because she saw responsibility taking root. There was no fairy tale ending, no promise of remarriage, no sweeping declaration of forever. But there was something far more honest. Love being redefined, not as possession but as presence. Caden learned that redemption isn't granted by forgiveness alone. It's earned through consistency, through humility, through choosing differently every single day. And if love was to return, it would not be because he asked for it. It would be because he had finally learned how to deserve it. Somewhere between past regret and future possibility, life settled into something quieter. And for the first time, that was enough. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that love should never be conditional and that true growth comes through humility, then you're exactly where you're meant to be. Here at Mr. Williams Storytime, we tell stories that don't just entertain, but stay with you. Stories about choices, consequences, and second chances that are earned, not begged for. If you believe storytelling still has the power to heal, to teach, and to humble us, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who might need this reminder today. Because the most powerful stories aren't about perfection, they're about becoming better, one honest choice at a time. The end.